Black delivery driver solves what 20 engineers failed. So smart, fix it now. Everyone was shocked. The 50th floor boardroom of Sterling architecture was an oppressive glass box, suspended over a Chicago that seemed impossibly distant and indifferent. Sunlight glinted off the polished mahogany table, illuminating the fine layer of dust that had settled in the tense silence. For over an hour, the only sound had been the frantic, useless clicking of a mouse and the shallow, panicked breathing of a dozen of the city's most accomplished architects. They were on the precipice of losing the Union Station renewal project, a contract that wasn't just about money, but about cementing a legacy. All because a single, decade-old soil analysis report, a ghost on paper, had vanished from their flawless digital servers. Richard Sterling, a man who wore his ambition like a second skin, finally broke the silence. He didn't just speak, he detonated. He slammed his palm flat on the table, the sharp crack making several of his senior partners physically flinch. His eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the room, bypassing his expensive team, and landed on a single, unprepared target. Liam, the firm's junior archivist, stood nervously by the door, having been summoned from the quiet, forgotten archives in the basement. He looked entirely out of place, a sparrow in a cage of hawks. "This," Richard began, his voice low and venomous, "is the price of keeping sentimental dead weight. A catastrophic failure of the most basic function." He paused, letting the accusation hang in the air. He turned his body fully towards Liam, forcing everyone else to do the same. "We are a forward-thinking billion-dollar firm, and we are about to be crippled by a disorganized, dusty dungeon and the one person whose entire job description is not to lose things." The insult was layered, aimed not just at Liam's competence, but at his very existence within the firm. He was framing Liam as an anchor holding back a speeding ship. Liam, barely 25 and dressed in a simple, blue-collared work shirt that looked a decade old, stood his ground. He didn't crumble. He didn't offer an excuse. His face remained a mask of unnerving calm. The only betrayal of his inner state was the slow, deliberate tightening of his fingers on the worn fabric of his shirt, his knuckles turning white. That frayed blue collar, a stark symbol of his working-class reality against the sea of silk ties and designer suits, seemed to absorb the collective tension of the room. Sarah, a junior designer, felt a knot of sickness in her stomach. She had seen Richard's temper before, but this felt different. It was a public execution. David, a senior partner, cleared his throat weakly. "Richard, perhaps the digital team missed," he started. But Richard cut him off with a glare so sharp it silenced him instantly. The message was clear. The narrative had been written. The villain had been cast. The atmosphere in the boardroom soured, the air thick with unspoken allegiances. A few of Richard's sycophants, senior partners who had ridden his coattails for years, nodded in solemn agreement. Their faces showed a disgusting mix of feigned seriousness and genuine relief. The scapegoat had been chosen. The crisis now had a name and a face, and it wasn't theirs. Others, mostly the younger architects and designers like Sarah, stared at their laps, their silence a heavy, suffocating blanket of dissent. They were unwilling witnesses to a brutal display of corporate power, and their inaction made them feel complicit. The tension was no longer about a missing file. It was about the raw, ugly hierarchy of the firm, laid bare for all to see. Liam, at the center of this silent storm, held Richard's gaze for a heartbeat longer than anyone expected. His eyes were not filled with the fear or anger Richard had intended to provoke. They held a deep, unshakable calm, an almost unnerving stillness, as if he were observing this entire scene from a great distance. Then, with a quiet dignity that was a louder statement than any shouted defense, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He turned to leave, his movements measured and deliberate. As he reached the heavy oak door, he didn't let it swing shut. He guided it with his hand, controlling its momentum until the latch clicked into place with a soft, final sound. This small act of grace, this refusal to be rattled, was a profound act of rebellion. It was the choice of a man who owned his space, even in retreat. From his position of power, Richard watched Liam's departure on the security feed displayed on the main screen. A smirk of pure contempt played on his lips. He saw a timid subordinate scurrying back to his hole, a problem swept under the rug. He had completely misjudged the man and the moment. He saw the frayed blue collar and assumed weakness. He saw the silence and assumed guilt. He failed to see the quiet strength in Liam's posture, the resolve in his steady hands. He thought he had ended the conversation. In reality, he had just awakened the one person in the building who knew that a company's history wasn't stored on a server, but was buried in the stories and secrets of its past. Upstairs, on the 50th floor, the atmosphere descended into a well-dressed panic. Keyboards clattered like machine gun fire. Voices grew sharp and strained. Richard paced the length of the boardroom like a caged predator, his earlier confidence replaced by a raw, exposed nerve. Run the search again. Use different keywords. Geological, foundation, soil, he barked. His team, a collection of the brightest minds from the best schools, were throwing everything in their digital arsenal at the problem. They were brilliant, they were fast, and they were utterly failing. The server, their digital god, was silent. Their system was a perfect, pristine library with one crucial book missing, and they had no idea how to find it. The blame game began in hushed whispers. "Did you check the off-site backup?" One designer hissed at another. "That was your responsibility." Down in the basement, the world was different. The air was cool and still, filled with the gentle, earthy scent of old paper and binding glue. Here, there was no chaos. There was only ritual. Liam stood before a towering wall of document tubes, a silent, forgotten monument to the firm's history. He methodically rolled up the sleeves of his blue-collared shirt, the gesture of a craftsman preparing for his life's work. This wasn't a job to him. It was a custodianship. He didn't use a computer. He opened a small, thick, handwritten logbook, his personal index, a codex of secrets he had built over years. Sarah, unable to bear the toxic energy upstairs, had come down. "Can I help?" she asked, her voice quiet. Liam looked up and gave her a small, grateful smile. He pointed to a page in his logbook. "I'm not looking for a file," he explained softly. "I'm looking for a person." He showed her the entry. Project Titan, Union Station. Lead engineer, Marcus Thorne. Retired 2015. Then he flipped a few pages. Note: after the small electrical fire in Sector Gamma 7 in 2014, all of Thorne's personal assay boxes were moved to the West Wing storage. He flipped again. West Wing cabinet labels were damaged and mislabeled by a temp worker. May 2014. See manual cross-reference. He was connecting threads, triangulating a location based on human events. A fire, a retirement, a temp worker's mistake. It was a stunning act of intellectual detective work. While Richard was shouting at a machine, Liam was having a conversation with ghosts. He walked to a forgotten, dust-choked corner of the archives, to a row of gray metal cabinets with faded, peeling labels. He wasn't just moving boxes, he was excavating the truth. The final 20 minutes before the deadline were an eternity of suffocating silence. Richard stood defeated, staring out the window at a city he was about to fail. His expensive team sat slumped in their chairs, their faces illuminated by the blank, mocking glow of their computer screens. The digital world had given them nothing. The silence in the room was no longer tense. It was funereal. It was the sound of failure. Then, the sound of a single pair of steady footsteps echoed from the marble hallway. The boardroom doors opened, not with a rush, but with a soft, deliberate push. It was Liam. He held a single, slender cardboard tube, gray with a decade's worth of dust. He walked with an unhurried, almost regal pace to the center of the vast mahogany table. Every head in the room turned, every eye fixed on him. He placed the tube on the table. Then, in a gesture of profound symbolism, he placed his own handwritten logbook next to it. The two objects sat side by side, the forgotten truth and the human memory that had unearthed it. With painstaking care, he unrolled the document. The crinkle of the old, heavy paper was the loudest sound in the room. It wasn't a modern printout. It was the original vellum blueprint. The room held its collective breath. In the bottom corner, next to the official stamps, was a small, elegant, handwritten note in faded fountain pen ink. Substrata rock composition is unique. Standard foundations will fail. See attached recommendations. This is the only copy. It was signed by Marcus Thorne. Richard spun around from the window. He saw the document, his eyes wide with disbelief. He saw the logbook next to it and the devastating simplicity of the solution. His mind, which had been racing with excuses and blame, went utterly blank. A visible tremor started in his right hand, a betraying twitch in his jaw. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a pale, waxy mask of shock. He looked at Liam, truly looked at him, and saw not a junior archivist, but the keeper of a key he never knew existed. In that silent, stretched-out moment, the entire power structure of the firm collapsed and reformed. All the authority, all the status, all the power in that room was drawn, as if by a magnetic force, from the man in the $1,000 suit to the man in the frayed blue-collared shirt. The spell of silence was finally broken by Ms. Eva Rostova, the firm's owner and a woman whose presence commanded respect without her ever needing to raise her voice. She had been observing the entire ordeal from her chair at the head of the table. The architects, who had previously avoided eye contact with anyone, now stared openly at Richard, their expressions a cold mixture of contempt and disapproval. The corporate drama had its hero and its villain, and the roles were now irrevocably cast. Ms. Rostova rose and walked gracefully to the table. She looked down at the report, then at Liam's logbook, and finally, her piercing eyes settled on Richard. Her voice was dangerously quiet. "So, Richard," she began, her tone laced with ice. "The sentimental dead weight," she said, throwing his own cruel words back at him, "is the only reason we are not facing utter humiliation right now? Your multi-million-dollar search grid failed, but a $20 logbook succeeded. Explain that to me." Richard visibly withered under her gaze. "Eva, I had tasked Liam with a deep physical search as a contingency plan," he stammered, a desperate, pathetic attempt to absorb Liam's victory into his own narrative. "No, Richard," Ms. Rostova cut him off, her voice sharp and final. "You were not planning. You were looking for a scapegoat." She turned her full attention to Liam, her expression softening with genuine respect. "Mr. Walsh, as of this moment, you are the new director of the Department of Institutional Integrity. It's a new department that you will build from the ground up. You will have your own team, your own budget, and the final authority on how this firm's history is protected and utilized. You will report directly to me." She had not only offered him a promotion, she had handed him the power to permanently fix the broken culture Richard had created. All eyes turned to Liam, expecting a triumphant smile. Instead, he simply looked at Ms. Rostova, his expression humble but firm. "Thank you, Ms. Rostova," he said, his voice steady. But the document was never lost. It was just waiting for someone to remember it mattered. His words landed with the weight of an unassailable truth, a final, quiet indictment of a system that had prized speed over substance and data over memory. 1 year later, the Sterling architecture offices were transformed. The dark, forgotten basement archive was gone. In its place, occupying a bright, sunlit space on the 49th floor, was the Department of Institutional Integrity. Liam, now a director, had built a team and a system that was the new gold standard in the industry. The Walsh Protocol, a revolutionary fusion of digital archiving and human context tagging, had not only saved the firm from future crises, but had also become a new source of revenue. Other Fortune 500 companies were now paying to license the system that valued their own corporate memory. Liam stood on a stage in New York City, the keynote speaker at the National Architecture Conference. He wore a simple dark suit, but he spoke with a quiet confidence that held the auditorium of thousands in rapt attention. He spoke not of servers or data, but of stories, memory, and the human element that held everything together. Back in Chicago, Sarah, now a senior project manager in Liam's department, was interviewing a bright young intern. "We almost lost the biggest project in our history because we forgot who we were," she explained, pointing to a framed display on the wall. It contained the original soil report and, next to it, Liam's handwritten logbook. Liam taught us that a company's foundation isn't concrete or steel. It's its memory. We used to value being the biggest. Now, we value being the wisest. Liam's quiet act of courage had done more than save a contract. It had given the entire firm a new, more profound identity. He hadn't just won a battle. He had fundamentally changed the culture. Richard Sterling sat in the back of a dimly lit bus, the city lights of Chicago smearing across the rain-streaked window. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by a generic, off-the-rack jacket that seemed too big for his diminished frame. After being let go from Sterling Architecture, he had discovered his reputation was toxic. His name, once a key that opened any door, was now a warning. He had just left a humiliating interview for a junior management position at a small suburban firm. He hadn't gotten the job. He pulled out his phone and saw a notification. A former colleague had posted a picture from the New York conference, showing Liam on stage to a standing ovation. Richard felt a familiar, bitter pang of jealousy. He had been the keynote speaker at that same conference for 5 years running. Now, he couldn't even get an invitation. He had spent his life building a career based on projecting an image of power, and he had learned too late that real power was something you built, not something you projected. As the bus rumbled into the night, he saw his own tired reflection in the dark glass. He thought of Liam's quiet confidence, of Ms. Rostova's disappointed eyes, of the empire he had lost. A single, whispered thought surfaced from the depths of his regret, a self-inflicted epitaph. "I am the one who was forgotten." In a world that sprints toward the future, we often discard the past as dead weight. We place our faith in flawless machines and forget the imperfect, invaluable wisdom of human memory. But true strength is not measured by the noise you make or the title you hold. It is measured by the value you quietly create, the foundations you secure when no one is watching. Integrity is the only structure that can withstand the test of time, while arrogance is a facade destined to crumble into dust. In the sunlit lobby of Sterling Architecture, there is a new centerpiece. It's not a sculpture or a painting. It's a simple glass case. Inside, resting on a bed of black velvet, is a clean, new blue-collared work shirt. It's the first thing every new employee sees. It is a permanent, silent reminder that the most essential work is often done by the quiet heroes we overlook, and that a company's greatest strength is the courage to remember what truly matters. Have you ever witnessed a quiet act of courage change everything? Follow for more true stories where integrity rebuilds the world.